Tonight, we slip beneath the surface of a cold and sunlit sea into a place where the ocean has decided, quietly and without ceremony, to become a forest. Not a forest the way we know forests. No bark, no birdsong, no roots drinking from dark soil, no solid ground beneath our feet. And yet, a forest, unmistakably. Towers of green rising from the seafloor toward the light. Corridors of shadow and movement. A canopy that sways. A world arranged in layers, each one its own kind of neighborhood, each one inhabited, each one alive in ways that take a moment to fully see. Hello there, and welcome to Deep Sea Slumber. This forest is built not from wood, but from algae, from a single living thing anchored to bare rock that reaches upward through dozens of feet of ocean with a patience and a speed that seems somehow to contradict each other. It is one of the tallest living structures on Earth, and it is not a plant. It is something older, stranger, and more flexible than that. It bends when the current asks it to. It floats because it carries in its own body small pockets of air. It grows in cold water, in places where the sea churns up something rich from the deep, and it builds, from that richness, a world. Kelp forests exist along coastlines where the ocean is restless and cold and generous. They are found where waves have shaped the rock into something the forest can grip. They rise in places that feel, from shore, like ordinary water, a dark stretch of coast, a line of surf, the smell of salt. But just beneath that surface, if you were to slip under and let your eyes adjust, you would find yourself inside something that has no good name in the language of land. A cathedral, some say. A library, a city. None of these quite fits. It is its own thing, patient, vertical, and green. Tonight, we will move through that world together. We will follow the light as it filters down through the canopy. We will notice the way the fronds move, the way the water holds its temperature, the way the whole structure sways in a single slow breath. We will meet the lives that shelter here, and we will come to understand gently what it means for a place to be alive. Not as a collection of creatures, but as a system, a conversation, a thing that holds itself together through relationship and current, and the simple fact of reaching toward the light. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. For now, let your shoulders settle. Let them drop just a little, away from whatever they've been holding today. There is nothing to carry tonight. Let your breath find its own pace. Slow, easy, unhurried, the way water moves when nothing is asking it to rush. We are drifting down, gently, into cooler water, into green light, into a forest that has been swaying quietly in the dark long before we arrived and will go on swaying long after we have rested. Let's begin. At first, the kelp forest seems familiar, almost like a memory of land carried underwater. And then the details begin to loosen that certainty. The shape is right. The proportions feel right. There is something above that filters the light, something tall and vertical rising from something dark below, and in between there is open space and shadow and the slow movement of things that live in both. Every instinct says forest. And yet, the longer you look, the more the familiar categories begin to drift apart. Because nothing here is wood. Nothing here is bark or root or heartwood or cambium. The whole towering structure, some of it 60 feet tall, some of it taller, is made of something else entirely. Something that has no business being this large. Giant kelp is not a plant. That sentence is worth pausing on because it contradicts something the eye insists it is seeing. It looks like a plant. It behaves in many ways like a plant. It reaches toward light. It grows from a fixed point. It photosynthesizes. And yet, it belongs to a completely separate lineage of life. The brown algae, a group so ancient and so distant from the plants we know on land that placing them in the same category would be like calling a jellyfish a fish, because both live in the water. The resemblance is functional, not ancestral. The kelp forest and the forests of the land arrived at similar solutions from completely different starting points, separated by hundreds of millions of years and the full width of evolutionary possibility. That is what makes it strange. Not that it is different from a forest, but that it is so similar to one, without sharing any of the history that made forests possible. The technical name for this is convergent evolution. The same pressures, the need to harvest light, the need to resist current and surge, the need to grow tall enough to compete, produced structures that echo each other across kingdoms of life. The kelp forest is not imitating anything. It simply found the same answer to the same questions independently in a completely different medium, using completely different materials. And the first of those materials is the holdfast. Where a tree has roots that push down into soil, drinking water and minerals from the earth, kelp has holdfasts that grip the surface of bare rock and do not drink anything at all. They are anchors, not organs. They hold. That is their only job. A holdfast looks something like a tangle of fingers reaching into every available crevice, pressing itself flat against the stone, securing the entire organism against the enormous pulling force of waves and surge. They are extraordinarily strong for what they are, a tangle of root-like structures called haptera, branching and rebranching, until they have found enough purchase to hold something 60 feet long in moving water. But they take nothing from the rock. There is no exchange of nutrients here, no relationship between the holdfast and the substrate it grips. The stone is just an anchor point, a place to hold on. Everything the kelp needs to grow, every mineral, every nutrient, it will take directly from the water moving past it. The ocean itself is the soil. The current is what feeds. This is such a different model of nourishment that it is easy to underestimate how radical it is. A tree's relationship with the ground is intimate and reciprocal. Its roots change the soil feeds the roots, and the whole system is bound together in an exchange that takes years to establish and decades to mature. Kelp has no such relationship with the rock it grips. It holds the rock the way a climber holds a handhold, because it needs the purchase, not the material. The stone is just the beginning of the climb toward light, and above the holdfast rises the stipe. The word sounds technical, but the thing itself is simple. A long, flexible stem that connects the holdfast to the canopy above. In a tree, this is the trunk, rigid, load-bearing, built to resist bending. A tree trunk is a structural achievement. It is made of layers of compressed, lignified cells, each generation building on the last, adding width and strength over years and decades. It stands against gravity and wind through sheer hardness. It does not bend. If it bends far enough, it breaks. The steep does not work this way. It is not rigid. It is not trying to resist the force of moving water. It bends with the current, leans into the surge, follows the motion of the water around it, and then returns, slowly, to something like its original position when the force passes. It is not weak. It is enormously strong in tension, the way a rope is strong. You cannot easily break a kelp stipe by pulling it, but you can move it. You can bend it nearly flat, and when the force releases, it will drift back upright, unhurried. This is a completely different engineering philosophy from the tree. The tree says, stand firm. The kelp says, go with it. Both strategies work. Both have produced organisms of extraordinary size. But only one of them is possible in a world where the medium itself is always moving, always pushing, always exerting force from unpredictable directions. Rigidity in that world is not strength. It is a liability. What makes the stipe possible, what makes the whole architecture possible, is what happens at the top. Along the stipe and at the base of each blade, there are small oval swellings. They are called pneumatocysts, gas bladders, floats. Each one is filled with a mixture of gases, carbon monoxide, nitrogen, oxygen, that makes it buoyant. And because they are buoyant, they pull the blades upward toward the surface, toward the light. They are the reason the forest has a canopy. Without them, the kelp would sink. The stipes would droop. The blades would drift down into the darker water below, where there is less light and less photosynthesis and less growth. The pneumatocysts are what make height possible in a world where there is no ground to push against, no gravity to climb. A tree grows tall by building upward, layer by layer, investing enormous energy in wood and bark and structural tissue. Kelp grows tall by floating. It does not build its height, it inflates it. The canopy of a kelp forest is held up not by the strength of anything below it, but by the buoyancy of thousands of small gas-filled structures pulling the whole living mass toward the sun. Imagine a forest where every leaf is attached to a tiny balloon, and the balloons are what hold the branches up. That is roughly what is happening here. The architecture runs upside down from what we expect. In a terrestrial forest, weight and gravity are the forces that must be overcome. Here, the structure works with buoyancy, with lift, with a tendency of gas-filled tissue to rise in water. The forest floats into its own shape, and that shape is always moving. This is perhaps the hardest thing to hold in the mind when thinking about a kelp forest, that it is not a static structure. A stand of trees, even in wind, has a fixed geometry. The trunks do not move. The branches sway, the leaves flutter, but the architecture underneath is still. The kelp forest has no such stillness. The stipes bend and return. The blades stream and settle. The canopy lifts and presses down with each passing swell. The whole structure breathes with the ocean's motion, expanding and contracting, leaning and recovering, in a continuous, slow pulse that never fully stops. This makes it difficult to measure in the way a terrestrial forest can be measured. You cannot walk through it and count fixed points. The geometry is always slightly different from one moment to the next. The space between stipes opens and closes. The light changes not just with the hour, but with every wave that passes overhead, filtering differently through a canopy that is never quite the same shape twice. And yet, it is recognizably itself. The forest persists. Individual blades may break loose and drift away. Individual plants may be uprooted by a powerful storm. But the structure, the architecture, the layered living tower from holdfast to canopy, this endures. not through rigidity, but through the continuous adjustment of flexible things to forces they cannot control and do not resist. Giant kelp can grow 2 feet in a single day under the right conditions. That is not a misprint. 2 feet in 24 hours. No other organism with this kind of structural complexity grows at anything close to this rate. A tree adding 2 feet of height might take a decade. Kelp adds it between one sunrise and the next. The forest is not just alive. It is rapidly, continuously, almost visibly alive, assembling itself upward into the water column at a pace that makes most of the living world seem slow by comparison. What this means is that the kelp forest is not a stable thing that took centuries to build. It is a thing that can be lost in a single winter storm and rebuilt within a season. It can vanish under the pressure of warm water or overgrazing and return, given the right conditions, in a matter of months. It is architecture made of time, but not very much time. The forest is always, in some sense, in the process of becoming itself. And there is something in that which takes a moment to settle. We tend to think of ancient forests as things that required centuries to arrive at their current form. The kelp forest can arrive almost overnight. Its age is not measured in rings of wood laid down year by year. It is measured in the accumulation of days when the conditions were right. The water was cold, the holdfasts held, and the gas bladders pulled the blades upward into the light 2 feet at a time. It is a young forest and an ancient one simultaneously. The lineage of brown algae stretches back hundreds of millions of years, but any individual forest, any particular stand of kelp swaying in any particular cove, may be only a few years old. The species is ancient, the forest is new, and it is always in the process of being made. The stipes bend now somewhere in dark water. The holdfasts hold their stone. The pneumatikists lift what they have always lifted, quietly, in the direction of light they cannot see, but have always moved toward. The forest is not standing still. It is never standing still. It is breathing, slowly, in the dark. The whole tall, flexible, living structure of it, moving with forces it does not resist, reaching toward light it has already found. And once this swaying architecture is understood, another question appears beneath it. What kind of water can sustain something so tall, so fast, and so alive? The answer begins not at the surface, but far below it. Giant kelp can grow 2 feet in a single day, not 2 feet over a season, not 2 feet across a lifetime. 2 feet in 24 hours, under the right conditions. That is among the fastest growth rates of any living thing on the planet. And the conditions that make it possible are not warmth, not stillness, not the gentle tropical ease that most people imagine when they picture the ocean at its most alive. They are almost the opposite of that. Cold, turbulent, chemically rich. A kind of water that would feel punishing to stand in for very long. What makes this worth sitting with is that the forest's abundance is built on hardship. The conditions that seem most hostile are the ones that feed it most completely. The ocean is not uniformly mixed. It settles into layers. Warm water floats, cold water sinks, and as it sinks, it carries with it the accumulated material of the surface world above. Dead organisms, drifting particles, the slow fall of biological debris that oceanographers call marine snow. This material gathers in the cold and dark of deep water. It becomes a reservoir, a slow accumulation of nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, the chemical vocabulary of growth, waiting far below where any light can reach it. That reservoir does not stay buried. Along certain coastlines, wind and the rotation of the earth combine to pull surface water away from shore. The ocean must replace what has been moved. It does so by drawing cold water upward from depth. This is upwelling, and it is one of the most consequential processes in the marine world. The water that rises has been cold and dark for a long time. It carries what it has collected. When it reaches the surface and the light finds it, something begins. Phytoplankton bloom. Small grazers follow. And where the seafloor is shallow enough and the rock is right, and the temperature stays within a particular range, kelp begins to grow. The coastlines where kelp forests thrive are not random. They cluster along the eastern edges of ocean basins, where upwelling is most reliable. The Pacific coast of North America, the coast of Chile, the edges of southern Africa, the waters around parts of Australia and New Zealand, the cold margins of the North Atlantic. These are places where the wind patterns and the shape of the continental shelf conspire to keep cold, nutrient-rich water circulating through the shallows. Not everywhere along these coasts, only where the conditions align precisely enough to allow something that tall to stand. That precision matters. Giant kelp requires water temperatures generally between about 50 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer than that, and growth slows. Significantly warmer, and the kelp begins to die back. The forest is not fragile in the way that word is sometimes used carelessly. It has survived for millions of years. But it is specific. It requires its particular kind of cold. And cold water holds more dissolved gas than warm water does. More oxygen, more carbon dioxide. The chemistry of the water is itself a function of its temperature. The cold that feels austere is the cold that breathes. Nutrients alone are not enough. Light is also required, and light and cold water do not always coincide conveniently. In winter, even along the most productive upwelling coastlines, the sun is lower, the days shorter, and the angle of light less favorable. Kelp slows. Some of the canopy breaks away. The forest thins. It does not disappear. The holdfasts remain, anchored to the rock, waiting. But the tall, swaying architecture of summer retreats into something smaller and more patient. Then spring arrives. The days lengthen. The sun rises higher. Cold water continues to rise from depth, and now there is both the chemistry and the light to use it. Growth accelerates. That 2 foot per day pace becomes possible in these windows. The forest climbs toward the surface, blade by blade, stipe extending upward, gas bladders filling, the canopy thickening overhead until it dims the water below it into a particular green shade that divers describe almost universally as cathedral light. The forest is seasonal in the way that forests on land are seasonal. It has its thinning and its fullness, its periods of reach and retreat. But the mechanism is different. A tree grows slowly and holds what it has built. Kelp grows fast and releases what it cannot keep. The impermanence is part of the design. Wave energy shapes the forest as much as chemistry does. Kelp forests do not grow in truly exposed locations, where the full force of open ocean swells would tear the stipes from the holdfasts and scatter the canopy. They tend to form where some protection exists, behind headlands in the lee of offshore rocks, along coastlines where the seafloor geometry softens the wave's arrival. But they do not want complete stillness either. Stagnant water does not deliver nutrients efficiently. The The forest needs movement. What it needs is surge, the rhythmic back and forth motion of water driven by waves that have been partially absorbed before reaching the grove. Surge moves through the kelp forest like a slow breath. The stipes lean one direction, then the other. The blades stream, then recover. This motion is not destructive. It is circulatory. It brings fresh, nutrient-rich water into contact with the kelp's surface, where absorption happens. It carries away waste. It prevents the small, stagnant pockets that would allow certain competitors to gain footholds. The forest survives surge because it does not resist it. A rigid structure would fail under that constant oscillation. But kelp is not rigid. It has never been rigid. It bends until the surge passes, then returns to its orientation. The motion that would break a tree is the same motion that feeds the kelp. That is not an accident. That is what millions of years of selection in a wave-shaped environment produces. There is also the matter of clarity. Light must reach the sea floor for the young kelp to begin its life there. Giant kelp starts as something almost invisibly small, a microscopic spore that settles on bare rock, germinates, and begins the slow early stages of growth in the first few inches above the substrate. If the water above it is turbid, clouded with suspended sediment or the bloom of other algae, the light does not reach the bottom and the young kelp cannot establish itself. This is why kelp forests tend to grow in clear water, even though clear water often means nutrient-poor water. The solution the forest requires is both clear and nutrient-rich, a combination that depends on the upwelling, bringing nutrients from depth without simultaneously stirring up sediment from the seafloor. It is a narrow window. The water must be transparent enough to let light through and chemically rich enough to feed what the light finds. When all of that aligns, the cold, the nutrients, the light, the surge, the clarity, the rock, the forest begins to assemble itself out of almost nothing. A spore, a holdfast, a stipe reaching upward through water that is doing most of the work. Consider what the kelp itself is doing at the cellular level during those periods of fastest growth. It is not storing energy slowly and releasing it gradually. It is running a kind of chemical sprint, pulling dissolved inorganic carbon from the water and converting it into the structural material of a new blade, a longer stipe, another gas bladder. The photosynthesis happening in a dense kelp canopy during a clear summer day is among the most productive biological activity in the ocean. Per unit area, a healthy kelp forest fixes carbon at rates comparable to a tropical rainforest. That productivity does not stay in the kelp. It moves. It feeds the grazers and the filter feeders and the detritivores. It enters the water column as dissolved organic material. It sinks to the seafloor as particles. It drifts beyond the forest's edge as detached fronds. The cold, nutrient-rich water that rises from depth and enters the forest does not simply become kelp. It becomes everything that lives in the forest's shadow, and everything that lives downstream of it, and everything that will eventually decompose and sink and rejoin the cold, deep water that will someday rise again. The upwelling is a cycle. The forest is one turn of it. What the forest asks for is quite specific: cold, clarity, nutrients, light, surge, rock, and time. Remove any one of these, and it thins or fails. Add all of them in the right proportions, and it becomes one of the most productive places on Earth, not despite its apparent harshness, but because of it. There is something worth resting with in that. The conditions that feel least hospitable, the cold water, the surge, the dark months of reduced growth, are not interruptions to the forest's life. They are part of what the forest is. The thinning of winter is what makes the fullness of summer mean something. The cold that discourages warmth-adapted species is what makes room for the particular life that belongs here. The forest does not grow in spite of the ocean's difficulty. It grows because of it. It is the difficulty, made visible and tall and alive, swaying in the green light it has filtered for itself from the sun. That is what the cold water builds, given time and the right shore to rise against. Not in spite of the conditions, out of them, entirely and quietly out of them. Because a kelp forest is never only one place. It is a stack of places, suspended between stone and sun. A mature giant kelp forest can rise 30 meters from the seafloor to the surface. That is roughly the height of a 10-story building. And like a building, it is not one continuous space. It is a series of distinct environments arranged vertically, each with its own light, its own temperature, its own pressure, its own character. A creature living on the sea floor and a creature living in the canopy may be separated by the length of a city block stood on end, and yet they might as well inhabit different worlds. What makes this so quietly astonishing is that the distance between those worlds is not measured in miles. It is measured in meters, sometimes in a single breath held while swimming upward. The bottom of the kelp forest is rock, not sand, not silt. Rock. This is where the forest begins and where its architecture is most permanent. The holdfasts grip here, those root-like structures that anchor each kelp stipe to the substrate. The holdfasts themselves are not simple. Each one is a tangle of finger-like extensions called haptera, which work their way into crevices and around irregular surfaces, locking the kelp to stone the way fingers might grip the edge of a ledge. One holdfast can anchor a stipe that will eventually rise 30 meters above it. That is the foundation of the entire structure, a fist of tissue clinging to a rock. The rocky seafloor around and beneath the holdfasts is its own neighborhood. It is dim here and dense. Urchins move slowly across the substrate. Snails graze on encrusting algae. Brittle stars extend their arms from beneath boulders. The holdfasts themselves become habitat. Small invertebrates tuck into the spaces between haptera, finding shelter in what is technically the root system of another organism. A single holdfast, examined closely, can harbor dozens of species living within its folds. That is what the forest does, even at its foundation. It creates shelter simply by being there. Every structure generates possibility. Above the holdfast zone, the stipes begin their long ascent. A stipe is not a trunk. It does not have rigid walls of cellulose and lignin. It does not hold itself upright through internal pressure or mechanical strength in the way a tree does. It is flexible, almost supple. In surge, stipes bend. In current, they stream sideways. They do not resist the water. They move with it and then return. This is the midwater corridor. It is the longest zone of the forest, stretching from just above the rocks to just below the canopy, and it is where the stipes run parallel to each other in loose columns, rising and swaying in unison when current passes through. Imagine standing inside a cathedral and looking up at columns that are slowly leaning all at once and then returning. That is something close to what this zone looks like from within. The light here is green. Not the green of a garden or a meadow, a deeper green, a filtered green, the color of sunlight that has already passed through meters of moving water and the partial shadow of the canopy above. It shifts constantly. When the surface moves, the canopy moves with it, and the light patterns below move too, long rippling shadows and bright shifting shafts alternating across the steeps. Nothing is still. The light itself is in motion. A diver entering this corridor from open water notices the change immediately. The temperature drops slightly. The ambient sound changes. The low surge becomes a kind of rhythmic pressure rather than a sound exactly, felt more than heard. And the visibility, which in open water might extend in all directions, is now structured. There are walls here, of a kind. Not solid walls, but corridors defined by the density of the stipes, which redirect the gaze the way columns redirect attention in a large room. You move through the forest rather than across it. That is the difference. Moving upward through the midwater zone, something changes gradually and then all at once. The stipes grow more numerous near the surface. They have been growing toward light since the moment the kelp germinated, and now they crowd together, their upper fronds extending and flattening and overlapping to form the canopy, the uppermost layer of the forest, which floats at the surface in dense mats of blades held up by pneumatocysts, the gas-filled floats that keep the whole structure reaching skyward. The canopy is where the kelp catches most of its light. That is where photosynthesis happens most intensely. And because the canopy captures so much of the available sunlight before it can descend, the layers below exist in the light the canopy allows through, which is not nothing, but which is fundamentally different from the brightness at the surface. This is one of the forest's most consequential structural facts. The canopy shades the interior, and in shading the interior, it creates the conditions for that green filtered light, for the dimmer and cooler zones below, for the layered neighborhoods that make the kelp forest so different from any flat habitat. The canopy is not just the top of the forest. It is the mechanism by which the forest differentiates itself from top to bottom. At the surface, where the fronds float and spread, the light is direct and the motion is greatest. Waves pass through here. The canopy heaves gently with swell, lifting and settling, lifting and settling. Animals that live in the canopy must be able to manage this constant motion. Some do it by gripping tightly. Others do it by simply being light enough that the motion carries them without harm. Below the canopy, the forest is quieter. Not still. The surge still moves through, still bends the stipes. But the energy of the surface is damped here, absorbed by the mass of the canopy above. The midwater corridor is sheltered in a way the surface is not, and the sea floor is more sheltered still. That is the gradient, not just of light, but of motion. The deeper you go in a kelp forest, the less the ocean moves you. Consider what it means to move through this structure vertically. A diver descending from the canopy to the seafloor in a mature kelp forest covers perhaps 25 or 30 meters. In open water, that distance is unremarkable, just depth. But inside the forest, those same meters pass through distinct zones, each with its own character. The canopy, bright and turbulent. The upper midwater, green and moving. The lower midwater, dimmer. The stipes more spread. The light more diffuse. The holdfast zone, dark and encrusted and still. The transition between zones is not sharp. There is no line on the water where the canopy ends and the midwater begins. It is gradual, the way the color of the sky changes at dusk. Not a boundary, but a slow shift that you notice only when you look back and realize how different things are from where you started. That is why the forest resists simple description. It is not one thing. It is a series of overlapping conditions arranged in height, each shading into the next, each distinct enough to support different communities of life. The forest is not a habitat. It is a stack of habitats, held together by the stipes that run through all of them. The density of the canopy varies. In some stretches, the fronds overlap so completely that the surface appears from below as an almost solid ceiling of green and brown, broken only by narrow gaps where light pours through in concentrated beams. In other places, the canopy is thinner, perhaps where a stipe has broken loose or where the kelp is younger, and the light below is correspondingly brighter, the character of the space more open. These gaps matter enormously. A gap in the canopy is not simply an absence, it is an invitation. Light floods through, and with light comes opportunity for smaller algae to grow on the rocks below, for photosynthetic invertebrates to orient themselves, for fish that prefer brighter water to move through. The forest is not uniform even within a single layer. It is patchy, variable, full of local conditions created by the shape and density of the kelp above. Some researchers describe the kelp canopy as functioning like a stained glass ceiling, not uniform, but organized in panels of varying translucency, each casting different light on what lies beneath. That image is not quite right, because stained glass is fixed and the canopy is always moving. But it captures something true about the forest's relationship to light, that what reaches the lower layers has been shaped, filtered, and organized by what came before it. The light that arrives at the seafloor of a dense kelp forest is a very particular kind of light. It is dim and green and shifting. It has traveled through meters of water and through the living architecture of the forest itself. It carries within it the signature of everything it has passed through. There is a quality to the interior of a kelp forest that is difficult to name. It is not silence. Water is never quite silent, and the surge is always there, a low rhythmic presence. It is not stillness. The stipes are always moving. It is not darkness. There is always light, even near the bottom, even in the densest groves. But it is something that combines aspects of all three. A hush, a sense of enclosure without confinement, a feeling of being inside something vast that is also somehow intimate. Divers who spend time in kelp forests often describe the same experience. The moment of entering the forest from open water, when the stipes close around them and the light shifts green and the ambient sound changes as a kind of crossing. Not into danger or into beauty exactly, though it is beautiful. Into somewhere else, into a place that has its own logic, its own scale, its own arrangement of space and light and motion. That quality is not accidental. It is structural. The kelp forest creates it through density, through height, through the particular way it filters light and dampens energy and arranges living things in vertical layers. A forest of trees on land can produce something similar. The way a dense stand of old-growth conifers changes the air inside it. Cooler, darker, quieter, with a different smell and a different sense of scale. The way you feel, moving from an open meadow into that kind of forest, that you have entered a different order of space. The kelp forest does the same thing, not with wood and bark and soil, but with algae and stone and water and light. The materials are different. The result is something recognizable across that difference, a world that rises above you and closes gently around you, and asks nothing except that you move slowly and pay attention. That is what it means to enter the vertical city, not to understand it all at once, to move through it, one layer at a time, and to let each layer be what it is. The canopy drifts at the surface, bright and restless. The midwater holds its green filtered quiet. The seafloor rests in shadow, patient, encrusted, still. And through all of it, the stipes rise in their long, slow columns, connecting stone to sun, holding the whole layered world together, bending when the water asks them to bend, and returning. And of course, once a place like this exists, it does not remain empty for long. The architecture came first. The holdfast gripping stone, the stipe climbing through the water column, the canopy spreading across the surface in long overlapping blades. All of that happened before any animal arrived to use it. But structure, once it exists, becomes invitation. Shelter draws life the way heat draws cold. And so, the forest filled, layer by layer, with creatures whose lives are now so thoroughly shaped by kelp that to imagine them without it is to imagine something incomplete. The fish arrive first in the mind because they are the most visible. They move through the open corridors of the midwater forest in loose groups, turning together through shafts of green light, then dispersing into the fronds when something changes in the current or the shadow. A school of small perch holding position in the water column is not simply swimming. It is reading the forest, attending to it, adjusting to the slight shifts in flow that the kelp itself creates as it sways. The fronds are not background. They are the reason the fish can be where they are. The Garibaldi is the one most likely to catch the eye first. It is a bright orange damselfish, vivid against the green and brown of the blades, and it does not hide. It patrols a territory among the holdfasts with a kind of unhurried insistence. This is its section of the forest floor, and it knows every rock. The color that makes it so visible is not a mistake. It is a signal, and the fish wears it without apology. In a world of camouflage and shadow, the Garibaldi's brightness is its own kind of defense, a clear announcement that this space is occupied, that the cost of a confrontation has already been calculated. Most other fish take the opposite approach. The kelp rockfish presses close to a stipe and becomes, to a passing eye, simply another texture in the water. Its coloring, soft brown, faint mottling, does not match any single part of the kelp. It matches the quality of the light in the forest, dappled, shifting, imprecise. A predator moving through the midwater is not looking for brown against brown. It is looking for motion, for outline, for the shape of a fish. The rockfish offers none of that. It offers stillness and texture and the suggestion of nothing worth pursuing. That is enough. Camouflage in a kelp forest is different from camouflage on a flat seafloor or an open reef because the light here is never uniform. It comes down in long columns and breaks apart where the canopy is dense. It shifts when the fronds move. A fish that is perfectly hidden one moment may be briefly illuminated the next as a blade swings aside and lets in more light, and then hidden again as the blade returns. This means that camouflage here is not a fixed state, but a dynamic one. The fish that survives is the one that holds still well enough, long enough across the full range of what the light will do. That is why so many of the forest's residents have learned to be patient in a way that looks, from the outside, like pure stillness. The lingcod rests on a rocky ledge near the seafloor and does not move for long stretches of time. It is not sleeping. It is waiting with great precision. Its body is mottled and irregular, the outline broken up by the uneven surface beneath it, and when a smaller fish drifts close enough, the wait ends in a moment so fast it barely registers. Then the stillness returns. The forest settles again around the event as if nothing occurred. Below the midwater columns, at the level of the seafloor and the holdfast zone, the forest changes character. The light is lower here. The surge still reaches down, but its force is absorbed by the long stipes above, and what arrives at the bottom is a gentler, slower movement of water. The rocks are encrusted with life, coralline algae in deep pink, sponges in orange and yellow, patches of bryozoan that look from a distance like pale lace draped over stone. And moving among all of this, slowly and without urgency, are the invertebrates. Sea stars move across the rock in a way that seems to belong to a different sense of time. They are not slow because they are simple. They are slow because their method of movement, hundreds of tiny tube feet, extending, gripping, contracting and releasing, is built for adhesion and precision rather than speed. A sea star crossing a rock encrusted with mussels is doing something deliberate. It knows, in whatever way a sea star knows anything, where the food is. It arrives, it stays. Snails graze the surfaces of stipes and blades, leaving faint tracks that are visible if you look closely. They are eating the thin film of diatoms and microorganisms that coats every surface in the forest. A layer so thin it is almost invisible, but so widespread that it represents an enormous amount of available food for any creature small enough to make use of it. The snail's slow circuit around a single blade might take most of a day. That is all right. There is more blade than the snail will ever finish. In the holdfasts themselves, the density of life becomes almost difficult to comprehend. A single large holdfast is not simply a root-like structure gripping stone. It is a habitat. The interlocking haptera create a three-dimensional maze of tunnels and chambers, and within that maze live amphipods, isopods, small worms, brittle stars, tiny crabs and juvenile fish that are using the holdfast as a nursery. One study of kelp holdfast communities found over 150 species living within a single holdfast. Not visiting, living, completing their lives, or the early parts of their lives, within the few cubic inches of space that one kelp plant's anchor provides. That number stays with you. One holdfast, one anchor point, one small knot of interlocking tissue gripping the rock, and inside it, 150 kinds of life going about the business of being alive, feeding, sheltering, growing, evading. The forest, it turns out, is not just the towering canopy overhead. It is also this, the smallest room in the building, packed with residents. The juvenile fish that shelter in holdfasts and dense frond clusters are there because the forest is a nursery in a very literal sense. Many species of fish that will eventually move out into open water or deeper reef systems spend their earliest months in the kelp, using its structure for protection during the period when they are most vulnerable. The fronds are too dense for large predators to navigate efficiently. The shadows are too complex for a hunting eye to scan quickly. A small fish that can thread through a stand of kelp blades has access to a kind of safety that does not exist in open water, where visibility is complete and cover is absent. This is one of the forest's less visible contributions. It produces fish that will never live in it as adults. The kelp raises them and then releases them, and they carry the benefit of that shelter outward into the wider ocean, where they become prey and predator in other systems. The forest's generosity does not stop at its own edge. Toward the canopy, the character of the residents changes again. Here the light is brighter, the motion is greater, and the animals are different. Kelp bass move through the upper forest with more confidence than their deeper relatives, using the surface canopy for ambush rather than concealment. They hold at the edge of a frond cluster and watch the open water beyond it, and when a smaller fish crosses that boundary, the base moves. The canopy is a hunting platform as much as a shelter. Seabirds dive through the surface into the upper canopy from above, folding their wings and entering the forest from a direction that the fish inside do not expect. The cormorant is particularly effective at this. It swims through the kelp with a speed that seems improbable given the density of the fronds, turning through the blades in pursuit of fish that are trying to use the same structure for cover. The forest that protects a fish from one direction can become a maze that traps it when the predator comes from another. And sea lions move through the forest in a way that makes their intelligence visible. They do not swim straight lines. They curve, loop, double back, use the stipes as visual cover before accelerating, and seem to understand the three-dimensional structure of the forest in a way that allows them to use it tactically. Watching a sea lion hunt in kelp is watching an animal that has learned to read a specific environment and use its particular features as tools. The forest shapes the hunter as much as it shapes the hunted. What all of this adds up to is a community of remarkable complexity, arranged by height, by light, by the availability of cover, and by the small, persistent pressures of hunger and safety that govern every life inside the forest. The Garibaldi holds its territory on the rock below. The rockfish holds still in the middle column. The bass patrols the canopy edge. The snail follows its slow circuit on the blade. The amphipod completes its entire life within a holdfast. None of them are using the same forest. They are using different floors of the same building, different hours of the same light, different affordances of the same structure. The kelp provides the architecture, and every resident finds within it the specific version of shelter and opportunity that its body requires. That is what structure makes possible. Not just safety in general, but the precise kind of safety that each creature needs. The forest doesn't offer the same thing to everyone. It offers everything to everyone, and each life takes from it what it can use. By the time the light begins to soften in the late afternoon, the forest has cycled through a full day of small decisions. A fish that rested near the bottom at midday has moved up into the water column as the shadows lengthened. A sea star that was still in the morning is now crossing a new section of rock. The holdfast is exactly as it was, full of creatures going about their quiet work in the dark. The current moves through the fronds, and the fronds move with it, and everything that lives here adjusts slightly to what the moment requires. That adjustment, repeated endlessly, is what a life in the kelp forest looks like from the inside. Small, continuous, and enough. Shelter is only part of the story. A forest also depends on the small, steady negotiations over who feeds, where, and how much. And in the kelp forest, that negotiation has a shape you can almost see. It moves slowly, and it does not look like a negotiation at all. It looks like a sea urchin, small and spined, moving across a rock. It looks like an otter floating on its back at the surface, holding something against its chest. It looks like a stand of kelp, tall and unhurried, bending in the current. But beneath that stillness, something is being decided. The question is always the same: how much will be eaten, and how much will be left to grow? That question, asked and answered 10,000 times each day by animals simply going about their lives, is what holds the forest together. Sea urchins are grazers. That is their work, their constant occupation, the thing they do with most of the hours of their lives. They move across rock and rubble on rows of tiny tube feet, and where they move, they eat. Their mouths face downward toward the surface they travel, and they are equipped with a structure so precise and so strange that scientists still find it worth examining. 5 interlocking calcium teeth, arranged in a kind of radial jaw, capable of scraping algae directly from stone. The structure is called Aristotle's lantern, named for a description the philosopher left in his writings more than 2,000 years ago. He noticed the shape of it, the way the whole apparatus resembled, from the outside, a horn lantern with the panels removed. The name persisted. It is one of the older pieces of scientific nomenclature still in regular use, and there is something quietly satisfying about that. A man watching a tide pool on a Greek coastline long before the concept of ecology existed, noticing the mouth of a small spined animal and finding it worth describing carefully enough that the description would last. What those teeth do, given time and numbers, is considerable. A single urchin grazing is unremarkable. A population of urchins grazing without interruption for weeks or months can reduce a living kelp forest to bare rock. What ecologists call an urchin barren is exactly what the name suggests. A stretch of seafloor where urchins have consumed not just the mature kelp, but the young holdfasts, the encrusting algae, the recruits trying to establish themselves. The rock is pale and empty. The urchins remain, waiting, able to survive on very little for a very long time. The forest is gone. That is what unchecked appetite looks like at scale. It is not malicious. The urchins are simply doing what they do. But the system as a whole depends on something keeping their numbers in a range that the kelp can survive. That something, on much of the North Pacific coast, is a sea otter. Sea otters are not large animals. An adult female weighs perhaps 20 kilograms. An adult male, perhaps 30. They spend most of their lives at the surface, floating on their backs in the kelp canopy, and they eat with a focus and a thoroughness that is, in its way, remarkable to watch. They are among the very few non-primate animals known to use tools regularly. When an otter dives to the seafloor and pulls a sea urchin from the rock, it often brings a stone up with it. Floating at the surface, it will place the stone on its chest, hold the urchin in both forepaws, and crack it against the stone until the shell gives way. Then it eats what is inside: the roe, the soft organs, the parts that matter. It may use the same stone for multiple dives. It may tuck a favorite stone under its arm before descending again. There is something in that image worth sitting with. An animal that has found, through whatever long process of learning and inheritance, that a particular rock is useful. and that keeps the rock and returns to it and uses it again. The tool is not elaborate, but the behavior it represents is. It suggests memory, preference, the recognition that an object encountered in one context can be carried into another and made useful there. Otters also eat quickly. A foraging otter can consume roughly a quarter of its body weight in food each day, which is a consequence of their physiology. They have no blubber, and so they generate warmth entirely through metabolism, which means they must eat constantly to stay warm. Their fur is extraordinarily dense, denser than almost any other mammal's, somewhere in the range of 100,000 hairs per square centimeter. And it traps a layer of air against the skin that insulates against the cold. But maintaining that warmth is expensive. The eating is not greed. It is the cost of living in cold water without an insulating fat layer, and the otter pays it every single day. That appetite, directed at urchins, keeps the urchin population in check, which keeps the kelp forest standing. The relationship between otters, urchins, and kelp became one of the most studied examples of what ecologists call a trophic cascade, a chain of effects that runs from predator through prey, through the ecosystem that prey would otherwise shape. Remove the predator, and the prey population grows. The prey population, unchecked, alters the habitat. The habitat changes, and the creatures that depended on it disappear. The story of how this was discovered is worth knowing, because it did not begin in a laboratory. It began with the near extinction of the sea otter. Hunters pursued sea otters across the North Pacific for roughly 2 centuries, beginning in the mid-1700s, targeting them for their pelts. By the early 20th century, the global population had fallen to perhaps 2,000 animals, scattered in small isolated groups along a coastline that had once held hundreds of thousands. In many places, otters were simply gone, and in those places, the urchin populations grew. And where the urchins grew unchecked, the kelp forests thinned. In some locations, the barrens spread for miles. When otter populations began to recover, through legal protection, through reintroduction efforts, through the slow accumulation of decades of survival, researchers noticed something. In areas where otters returned, urchin populations declined. And where urchin populations declined, kelp forests began to recover. The correlation was clear enough to follow, and careful fieldwork confirmed what the correlation suggested. The otter's presence was, in a meaningful sense, the forest's presence. The ecologist who did much of this foundational work, James Estes, described the otter as a keystone species, borrowing an architectural metaphor for an animal whose removal causes the structure above it to collapse. The keystone of an arch is not the largest stone. It is the one whose position holds the others in place. Remove it, and the arch falls. The otter is not the largest animal in the kelp forest, but it may be the most consequential one. What makes this relationship so quietly striking is how ordinary it looks from the inside. The otter is not protecting the forest. It is not aware of the forest as a system that depends on it. It is hungry, and urchins are available, and it has learned to find them and open them and eat them efficiently. The urchin is not destroying the forest. It is grazing, moving slowly across the rock, doing what it has always done. The kelp is not flourishing in gratitude. It is simply growing where the conditions allow. And yet the sum of those 3 entirely ordinary behaviors, eating, being eaten, and growing, produces a forest, or loses one. there is something in that worth turning over slowly. The forest does not depend on any creature understanding it. It depends on creatures doing what they do, in roughly the right proportions, in roughly the right places. The balance is not maintained by intention, it is maintained by presence. When the otter is there, eating what it eats in the quantities it needs, the urchins stay within a range the kelp can survive. The kelp grows. The fish shelter in it. The invertebrates colonize its holdfasts. The canopy spreads across the surface and filters the light into green corridors. All of that because an animal needed to eat and ate the right things and was there to eat them. The picture is not perfectly simple, and it would be dishonest to leave it as though it were. Urchin populations are also shaped by disease, by storm disturbance, by the availability of drift kelp that feeds urchins even when living fronds are scarce. Otters are not the only predators of urchins. Sunflower sea stars, before a devastating disease reduced their populations dramatically in recent years, also played a significant role in controlling urchin numbers along the Pacific coast. The loss of those stars has been felt. The kelp forest is not a two-body problem. It is a system with many moving parts, and the balance within it can be disrupted in more than one way, and restored in more than one way too, or sometimes not restored at all, at least not quickly, at least not without help. But the otter and the urchin remain at the center of the story that most clearly shows how behavior scales. How the daily actions of one kind of animal, diving, cracking shells, eating, floating at the surface in the afternoon light, can hold open a space where thousands of other species live. There is a particular image that tends to stay with people who spend time watching sea otters in kelp forests. The otter, resting at the surface, will sometimes wrap itself in a loose strand of kelp before sleeping. Not tightly, not deliberately in the way a person might tuck in a blanket, but enough to keep from drifting away from the canopy while it rests. The kelp holds the otter in place. The otter, in its way, holds the kelp in place. It is a small thing to notice, but it carries something. Two lives, wound loosely together at the surface, each one persisting alongside the other, each one part of the reason the other can exist here. The forest continues around them. The current passes. The blades move in their slow and patient way. The otter sleeps, wrapped in what it has helped to keep. Even then, the kelp forest is doing more than sheltering bodies in one place. It is also sending itself outward, piece by piece. A blade loosens from its stipe. Not violently, there is no violence in it. A surge passes through the canopy, the way a slow breath moves through a curtain, and one blade among thousands simply releases. It has been working for months, this blade, pulling light down through its flat surface, drawing dissolved minerals from the water that moved around it. Now it drifts. It joins the slow current moving along the forest edge, and it begins a different kind of work. This is where the kelp forest extends beyond itself. Not through roots that spread underground, not through seeds carried on the wind, but through pieces, through what it lets go. Giant kelp is among the most productive organisms on the planet. A single plant can grow 10 inches in a single day under the right conditions. That rate of growth means an enormous amount of living material is being built continuously in the water column above any healthy kelp forest. And what is built in such quantity will also, in such quantity, break apart. Blades wear at their edges. Older fronds detach. Whole stipes come loose when storms disturb the holdfast zone, or when an animal grazes a little too long in one place. The forest is always shedding. What it sheds does not disappear. Some of it sinks. Large pieces of kelp, heavy with water and age, descend slowly through the water column toward the seafloor. On the way down, they are grazed by small crustaceans, by amphipods and isopods that cling and feed as the material falls. Some pieces settle on the sand and rock at the base of the forest, where they are met by a different community entirely. Sea cucumbers moving their patient paths across the bottom. Brittle stars extending delicate arms to gather whatever arrives. Bacteria working in the thin layer of sediment, invisible and essential. The sea floor beneath a kelp forest is richer for what falls from above. It is fed from the ceiling. This is called marine snow, though snow is almost too light a word for it. It is more like a slow, continuous rain of organic material, particles, fragments, the broken down remains of what lived and grew above. It falls through every layer of the water column. It feeds things that have never seen sunlight. The energy of the sun, captured by kelp fronds in the bright upper water, travels downward in pieces, arriving on the seafloor as nourishment for animals that live entirely in the dim or the dark. The forest reaches further than it appears, but not all of it sinks. A great deal of kelp drifts sideways. Detached fronds and whole stipes ride the current outward from the forest's edge, moving into open water, onto sandy beaches, into kelp beds that may not produce as much of their own material. Detached kelp has been found far offshore. Pieces have been collected on beaches hundreds of miles from the nearest forest. In the open ocean, a drifting mass of kelp becomes a temporary island, a floating habitat where small fish can shelter, where invertebrates can cling, where seabirds can rest. The forest sends pieces of itself out across the water, and those pieces carry their own small ecosystems with them as they travel. This is not a strategy. The kelp is not planning anything. It is simply that life, wherever it produces abundance, tends to share that abundance outward, not through intention, but through physics, through current and gravity and the slow work of decay. On the shoreline, this becomes visible. Kelp wrack, the tangled mats of washed-up kelp that accumulate on beaches after storms or strong swells, is one of the most nutritious things the ocean regularly delivers to land. It arrives heavy and dark, smelling of salt and something older than salt. And it is eaten. Beach hoppers and sandflies arrive within hours of a fresh deposit. Shorebirds probe the wrack for invertebrates hiding in its folds. Kelp flies lay their eggs in it. Isopods, beetles, and a dozen other small animals make their living in the decomposing fronds along the high tide line. Some of that nutrition eventually moves inland, carried in the bodies of birds that feed on the beach, or washed further up by rain and tide, slowly becoming part of the soil at the dune edge. The forest's contribution to the land is real, even if it is quiet and gradual and easy to miss. What makes this remarkable is the scale of it. Kelp forests cover a significant portion of the world's cooler coastlines, along the Pacific coasts of North and South America, around southern Africa, along the shores of Australia and New Zealand, in the waters around the sub-Antarctic islands. Each one of these forests is producing and releasing material continuously. The combined output moves through nearshore ecosystems in ways that scientists are still working to fully understand. The forest is not an isolated thing. It is a source. There is a word in ecology for this kind of relationship: subsidy. One habitat subsidizing another with energy and material. The kelp forest subsidizes the seafloor below it, the open water beside it, the shoreline beyond it. It feeds communities it will never touch directly. Its influence moves outward through current, through drift, through the slow fall of particles in water that holds everything for a while before letting it settle. And within the forest itself, that same circulation is always running. What a sea urchin grazes and partially digests becomes available to smaller organisms. What a Garibaldi fish drops from its mouth drifts down toward the bottom. What a kelp holdfast shelters in its dense tangle of Haptera. The small worms, the crustaceans, the tiny snails, eventually contributes to the sediment layer when the holdfast itself dies and releases. Nothing leaves the system entirely. It only changes form. Decomposers are the quiet center of this. Bacteria and fungi, working at a scale invisible to the eye, are the ones who actually break complex organic material down into its simplest chemical components. The dissolved nutrients that kelp and other algae will draw back up through their blades and use again. This is the cycle at its most fundamental. Kelp grows by drawing nutrients from the water, dies and sheds material into the water, and that material is broken down by microbes and returned as nutrients that feed the next generation of kelp. The forest is, in a sense, feeding itself through its own remains. Growth and decay are not opposites in this system. They are the same process, running in a loop. There is something very old in that. Not just old in the sense of ancient, though it is ancient. The cycling of nutrients through ocean ecosystems has been running in some form for billions of years. Old in the sense of being fundamental, being prior to everything else. Before there were kelp forests, before there were reefs, before there were fish with complicated lives, and otters with clever paws, there was this: organic matter falling through water, bacteria breaking it apart, elements returning to the water column to be used again. Everything that came later was built on top of that process. The kelp forest is elaborate and beautiful, but its foundation is the same quiet chemistry that has always run at the base of ocean life. Imagine, for a moment, a single kelp blade on its way to the seafloor. It is the size of a large hand, maybe smaller, and it is sinking at the pace of a slow exhale. Along its surface, barely visible, a few amphipods are grazing, their small bodies curved against the blade as it descends. By the time it reaches the bottom, it will be smaller than when it started. By the time the sea cucumbers and brittle stars have worked through it, it will be smaller still. By the time the bacteria have finished, there will be nothing left that you could call kelp. Only dissolved nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon drifting in the water, available, patient, waiting to be drawn up through the blade of something new. That is what nourishment looks like at this scale. Not dramatic, not sudden. A slow passage through forms, each one feeding the next, none of it wasted. The forest does not hold on to what it makes. That is part of what makes it a forest rather than a warehouse. Energy flows through it and outward from it in every direction. Downward through the water column, sideways into open sea, upward through the bodies of animals that feed here and are fed upon elsewhere. The kelp forest is less a place where energy is stored than a place where it is transformed and passed along. A relay point, a converter. And this is why the health of a kelp forest matters beyond the forest itself. When a forest thins, When sea urchin populations go unchecked, when warming water slows growth, when storms strip the canopy and recovery is slow, the effects move outward through all those connected systems. The seafloor community receives less material. The shoreline receives less wrack. The open water fish that shelter in drifting fronds have less to shelter in. The beach hoppers have less to eat. The birds that feed on the beach hoppers move on, or they don't. A kelp forest is not a self-contained world. It never was. It is a node in a much larger circulation, and what passes through it, what it produces and releases and loses, shapes the living world for miles in every direction. That is a quiet kind of power, the kind that is easy to overlook because it does not announce itself, because it works through drift and fall and the slow work of decomposition rather than through anything visible from a distance. But it is power nonetheless. The forest feeds the sea in the same way that patience feeds a life, not all at once, not loudly, but continuously, in small amounts, without ever entirely stopping. The blade that loosened this morning is still sinking. Somewhere in the dim water below the canopy, it is making its way down. The amphipods have already gone. The blade is smaller now and darker and slower. It will reach the bottom before long. And when it does, it will be met, the way everything that falls in the ocean is eventually met, by something that has been waiting in its quiet way for exactly this. And after watching the forest at work for so long, it begins to suggest something larger than ecology alone. There is no stillness here. There never has been. The blades stream in one direction, then lean slowly back. The stipes bow and recover. The canopy lifts on a passing swell and settles again, lifts and settles, as regular as breathing and as old as the coastline itself. Nothing in a kelp forest holds a fixed position. Everything is in constant, patient negotiation with the water moving through it. That is the first thing to notice. Not the motion itself, which is easy to see, but what the motion means. The forest is not being disturbed. It is not waiting for the current to stop so that it can return to some proper resting state. The motion is the resting state. This is what undisturbed looks like here. We tend to think of strength as resistance. Something strong in the way we usually imagine it pushes back. It holds its shape. It does not yield. A wall is strong. A pillar is strong. We build things to stand against force, and we call that durability. The kelp forest has no interest in this kind of strength. It has found something else entirely. A stipet can grow to 40 or 50 meters long. It is not rigid. It has no woody core, no internal scaffolding, no tension cables running through it. It bends completely. In a heavy surge, the entire length of a mature kelp plant streams almost horizontal, and then, when the surge passes, it rises again. Not because it fought the water, because it went with it and then came back. That is not weakness. That is a different answer to the same problem. The holdfast at the base grips the rock. The gas bladders at each blade's base hold the stipe upright in calm water. The blade itself is broad and thin and offers almost no resistance to current. It simply aligns with whatever is moving past it. Every part of the plant is designed to redirect force rather than absorb it. And so the kelp survives storms that would shear off anything rigid. It survives surge and swell and the long pull of tides. It survives by never insisting on its own shape when the water asks it to change. There is something worth sitting with in that. The animals of the forest have learned similar things in their own ways. The fish that shelter in the midwater columns move in small adjustments, tilting slightly against a current, holding position not by fighting the flow, but by reading it and responding continuously, the way a hand trails in water from a moving boat and finds its own equilibrium without any effort at all. The urchins on the rocks below grip with hundreds of small tube feet, not rigid but collectively patient, holding on through friction and contact rather than through any single point of strength. The otters at the surface wrap themselves in kelp to anchor against drift while they sleep, borrowing the forest's own structure to stay in place, using relationship as an anchor rather than digging their own. The whole forest is like this. It is a system that persists not because any part of it is immovable, but because every part of it is responsive. What makes this worth contemplating is that we rarely think of responsiveness as a form of endurance. We tend to admire what lasts by staying the same: the ancient rock, the old-growth trunk, the thing that resists time by remaining unchanged. The kelp forest offers a different image. It endures by changing constantly. The individual blade that streams in today's current is not the same blade that was there 6 months ago. Kelp grows fast and breaks and regrows, and the forest turns over much of its biomass within a single year. The specific is temporary. The pattern persists. In other words, the forest is not the individual plants. It is the arrangement, the relationship, the ongoing negotiation between living things and the forces that move through them. Remove the kelp and the forest is gone, but the kelp is always being replaced. What remains is something more like a process than an object, a way of being rather than a thing. This is ancient. The lineage that produces giant kelp has been finding its way along cold, rocky coastlines for millions of years. Not always in the same form, not always in the same places. The coastlines themselves have shifted. The temperatures have risen and fallen. The upwellings have strengthened and weakened across geological time. And still, wherever the conditions allowed, cool water, hard substrate, enough light, enough surge to carry nutrients, the forest assembled itself and began its swaying. It did not persist by being tough. It persisted by being suited, by being the right kind of soft in the right kind of place. There is a version of resilience that looks like armor, like walls, like anything that refuses to be moved. And then there is this, a forest that survives every storm by becoming, for a moment, the storm's own shape, by moving with what cannot be stopped, by returning slowly to upright when the force has passed. The light that comes through the canopy moves too. It is not the steady light of an open field or a lit room. It shifts with every passing wave at the surface, bending and scattering and gathering again into brief, bright columns that drift across the rocks below. The forest floor is a place of moving shadows and moving brightness, and the animals that live there have adapted to that too. Eyes tuned to flickering, bodies patterned to disappear in dapple, behavior calibrated to a world where the light itself is never quite the same from one moment to the next. Even the light does not hold still. Even the light bends, and somehow, within all of this motion, there is extraordinary stillness. Not the stillness of nothing happening, but the stillness of everything happening in balance. The current moves, and the blades stream, and the fish adjust, and the canopy breathes, and the water carries its cold nutrients upward, and the whole system continues. And none of it is loud, none of it is urgent, none of it strains. It is simply the forest being the forest, motion without struggle, change without crisis. That is the quality that is hardest to name and easiest to feel when you are inside it. A diver moving slowly through a kelp forest often describes something like calm. Not the absence of sensation. There is plenty of sensation. The cold, the current, the presence of creatures everywhere. But a kind of ambient ease. The forest is so thoroughly itself, so completely organized around its own logic, that there is nothing to resist. You move through it and it moves around you. And for a while the distinction between being in a place and being part of a place becomes very soft. That might be what the forest teaches, if forests teach anything. Not through intention, not as a lesson, simply as the truth of how it works. That some forms of endurance require constant adjustment. That stability can be built from flexibility. That a thing can be strong without being rigid, persistent without being fixed, resilient without being hard. The kelp bends. The holdfast holds. The gas bladders rise. The blade aligns itself with whatever is passing through. And the forest remains. Not still, not unchanging, not finished with its motion, but present, continuous, patient in the way that only very old and very well-suited things can be patient. Not waiting for anything, not resisting anything, simply continuing in the way it has always continued in the cold and moving dark far from shore. The more closely this forest is known, the more it begins to feel like a threshold rather than a location. Not quite ocean, not quite land. Something older than either category, or at least older than the line we have drawn between them. The kelp forest grows in the narrow band where those two worlds press against each other, where waves arrive from thousands of miles of open water and meet, at last, the fixed resistance of stone. And in that meeting, in the turbulence and the cold and the upwelling and the surge, something extraordinary decided to grow. That is worth sitting with for a moment. Not the biology of it, which we have already moved through, but the strangeness of the location itself. The shoreline is the edge of the world as land creatures understand it. Stand on a rocky coast and you are at the end of something. The continent ends. The familiar ends. What continues beyond the surf is, to most human experience, largely unknown. And yet, just past that breaking water, in the first cold fathoms of the sea, one of the planet's most elaborate living worlds has been quietly present for millions of years, hidden in plain sight, half visible from shore, ancient beyond the scale most minds comfortably hold. Giant kelp as a life form is old. The genus has been here, in forms recognizable to what exists today, for somewhere around 14 million years. That number is difficult to picture. It is easier to say, the kelp forest was already ancient when our earliest ancestors began standing upright. The Pleistocene came and went, the ice sheets advanced, the seas rose and fell, coastlines shifted and reshaped, and the kelp remained, adapting quietly, persisting in the cold productive margins of the world's oceans. It has watched, in a sense, as the land above it changed beyond recognition. Forests came and went. Mountains rose slowly. Rivers carved new paths. The surf continued to break on the rocks, and beneath the surf, the kelp kept growing toward the light. There is something in that continuity that is hard to name. It is not comfort exactly. It is more like perspective. The feeling that comes when something reminds you how long the world has been working without you, and how well it has done so. Humans have known this edge for a very long time. Coastal peoples lived alongside kelp forests for thousands of years, before anyone had a word for what they were looking at. The kelp itself was useful. Dried and burned, it yielded ash rich in minerals. Washed ashore in dense windrows, it marked places where the sea was generous, where fish gathered, where diving was rewarding. Some researchers believe that early human migrations along the Pacific coast were helped by the kelp forest itself, that the great canopy, stretching in a nearly continuous belt from the North Pacific to the coast of South America, offered a kind of road through the margins of the sea. Consistent food, reliable shelter for the animals that people hunted, a productive edge to follow, the kelp highway, some have called it, a quiet corridor of abundance running along the rim of the Pacific, available to anyone willing to travel by water and live close to the shore. That is a different kind of wonder than the biological kind. It is the wonder of realizing that the forest was not merely background to human history. It may have been part of how that history unfolded, one of the conditions that made certain journeys possible, that fed certain communities, that shaped where people settled and how they understood the sea. For a long time after that, the kelp forest was known more by feel than by sight. Sailors feared it. Dense kelp beds could slow a vessel, tangle a rudder, make navigation uncertain in fog and low light. Old charts marked kelp forests as hazards, as obstacles, as places to avoid. And the forest was experienced from above, as resistance, as entanglement, as something the sea threw up in the way of passage. What was happening beneath the surface was largely invisible and largely unimagined. Even the word for what it was took time to settle. Kelp, in early usage, referred not to the living plant, but to the ash left after burning. The living organism was the seaweed, the wrack, the tangle. It did not yet have the status of a forest. It was not yet understood as an architecture, a world, a place with interior rooms and vertical layers and thousands of dependent lives. That understanding came slowly, the way most deep understanding comes, not through a single discovery, but through accumulated attention. Naturalists began diving. Biologists began cataloguing. Photographers brought back images of what the interior of the canopy actually looked like. The green filtered light, the long vertical lines of the stipes, the way a diver moving through the fronds entered something that felt unmistakably like a forest. The word caught up to the experience at last. And once it did, the forest became visible in a new way, not just as a hazard or a resource, but as a place, a living, layered, ancient place that had been there all along. There is an emotional quality to the kelp forest that is different from other underwater habitats. Coral reefs have a quality of abundance that is almost overwhelming, color and motion and density pressing in from every direction. The open ocean has a quality of vastness that can feel humbling, even vertiginous. But the kelp forest has something else, something more like the feeling of being inside a cathedral or under the canopy of very old trees. It is the verticality, partly, the sense of a ceiling far above, of shafts of light descending, of small lives arranged in the space between floor and sky. It is the filtered green of the light, which softens everything it touches and makes the familiar seem strange. It is the motion, the constant, slow, rhythmic lean of the fronds in the surge, like breathing, like something alive in a way that goes beyond the individual organisms swaying within it. Divers who know the kelp forest often describe it in terms usually reserved for sacred spaces. Not because they are being poetic, but because the experience seems to reach for that register naturally. There is something about being inside a living structure, that tall, that old, that full of quiet motion, that does something to the human sense of scale. You become small in the kelp forest, not diminished, just accurately sized. The forest has been here longer than you. It will very likely be here after you. And in the meantime, it offers its green light and its cold water and its swaying fronds without reservation to anyone who enters it with enough stillness to pay attention. The threshold quality of the place runs deeper than geography. The kelp forest exists at the border between the known and the unknown, between the surface world and the deep one, between the familiar and the genuinely strange. Stand at the shore and look out. The ocean is opaque, impenetrable to the eye, a flat grey or blue surface that gives almost nothing away. Walk into the water, submerge, open your eyes, and the world opens in the other direction, down and in. A vertical world assembles itself around you, full of life that has never needed your presence and does not require your understanding to continue. That shift, from the surface to the interior, from the outside to the inside of the forest, is one of the more quietly profound transitions available to a human body. It requires no great journey. The kelp forest grows close to shore, in water shallow enough to reach by swimming. The distance between the ordinary world and this ancient, living, swaying world is measured in yards, not miles. And yet, almost everyone who has entered it for the first time describes a feeling of having crossed into somewhere genuinely different, not another planet, something stranger than that, the same planet seen from the inside of one of its oldest living rooms. The forest does not ask to be understood. It does not offer itself as a lesson or a symbol. It simply persists in the cold water, in the surge, anchored to its ancient rocks and lifting its long arms toward the light. But it is hard to spend time with it, even from this distance, even in imagination, without feeling that it has something to say about edges, about the places where different worlds meet, and something extraordinary grows in the friction between them, about how the most alive places are often the threshold places, the in-between places, the places that belong to neither one world nor the other. The kelp forest belongs to the edge. It always has. And the edge, it turns out, is one of the richest places on Earth. The forest sways in the dark now, somewhere along a cold and rocky coast, as it has swayed for millions of years. The surge moves through it. The light is gone, or nearly. The fronds settle into their nighttime lean, patient and unhurried, waiting in the way that ancient things wait, without urgency, without effort, without any need at all for the night to end. And now we stop knowing and simply become. There is no weight here. There is no body to speak of, no fins, no hands, no breath held or released, only presence, only the water and you moving through it, or perhaps the water moving through you. It is difficult to say which. The forest is around you now. You are not in it the way a fish is in it, or a diver, or an otter threading between fronds. You are simply here, the way attention is somewhere when it is very still. And the kelp does not notice you. The fish do not scatter. The water goes on doing what water does, and you go on being present in it, and that is enough. It is morning, or what passes for morning this far beneath the surface. The light is arriving from above, not as a single beam, but as many, broken and scattered by the surface chop. filtered through the canopy until it becomes something softer than light usually is. Green, shifting. The kind of light that moves even when nothing else does. It falls through the fronds in long, slow columns, and the columns lean slightly with each surge, and then straighten, and then lean again. This is the rhythm of the place. This is what it sounds like to be inside something breathing. The water is cold. Not cold the way cold is unpleasant. Cold the way cold is a fact, like the color of stone or the weight of a quiet room. This cold came from deep water, rising slowly toward shore, carrying with it everything it gathered on the way up. Minerals, dissolved matter, the patient chemistry of the deep sea floor. That is why the kelp grew so tall. That is why the forest is here at all. The cold built this. You drift upwards slightly. The canopy is close now. The gas bladders, small, round, each one a held breath, press against the surface from below, keeping the fronds aloft, keeping the whole structure reaching toward the light it needs. They cluster at the base of each blade, translucent and still, and they have been doing this for as long as this stipe has been growing. Quietly, without instruction, simply rising, because rising is what they do. The light is strongest here, just beneath the surface. The water is almost bright. Then you settle back down, slowly, through the midwater. The stipes are all around you, not crowded, but present. The way trees are present in a forest when you are standing among them and not looking at anyone in particular. They sway. They do not sway all at once, but in a loose, unhurried sequence, like something very large turning over in its sleep. A surge arrives from the direction of the coast. The whole forest leans away from it, and then the surge passes, and the forest straightens, and the leaning was not damage. It was never damage. It was the forest's answer to force, and the answer has always been yield and return. A fish passes close enough that you feel the water shift. It is a small fish, dark along the back, pale beneath, moving with the easy confidence of something that knows every corner of this place. It slips between two stipes and disappears into the shadow there. You do not follow it. You only notice that it is gone, and that the space it left behind is still, and that the still space is also part of the forest. Lower now. The light here is different, dimmer, greener in the way that things are green when light has traveled a long way to reach them. The stipes are thicker down here, closer to the base. The water moves differently, not the long lean of surge, but something smaller and more complex. A kind of slow turbulence that turns particles in gentle spirals and then lets them drift again. Tiny flakes of matter move through the water around you, pieces of blade, broken loose from somewhere above. They are on their way down. They are on their way somewhere else, to become something else, to feed something that never climbs higher than this. The rocky floor is below you now. You can see it. Dark stone, crusted and irregular, every surface occupied. The holdfasts grip the rock in their branching root-like way, gripping without drinking, anchoring without pulling anything from the stone. They only hold. And what they hold is everything above them. The stipes, the blades, the gas bladders, the canopy, the light that filters down from the surface, the fish that thread through it all of it resting on the grip of something small and strong at the bottom. An urchin moves along the rock below, slowly. It is not hurrying. It has never hurried. Its spines shift as it goes, each one adjusting, the whole animal rolling forward in a way that looks effortless because it has been practiced for a very long time. It grazes as it goes, and the grazing is quiet, and the kelp it touches gives a little, and the urchin continues. Somewhere above, at the surface, there is an otter. You cannot see it from here, but you know it is there, floating on its back perhaps in the way otters do. Chest up, paws folded, riding the small waves without effort. It may be resting, it may be watching the sky. It is held up by water and by its own dense air-trapping fur, and it is warm in the cold sea, and it has been here all morning, and the kelp forest has continued around it the way a forest continues around any creature that rests within it. The afternoon light is different from the morning light. You notice this without having moved very far. The columns have shifted angle. The shadows that the stipes cast across each other have moved, and the floor below is lit differently, and the fish have redistributed themselves in ways that are subtle and probably invisible to anything that is not simply present and watching. A school of small fish hangs in the midwater, not moving much, holding position against a mild current the way a mobile holds position in a breeze. Each fish faces the same direction. Each fish makes the same small adjustments. Together, they look like a single thing thinking. Then something shifts at the edge of the forest, and the school compresses, and then expands, and then they are gone. Not frightened exactly, just rearranged. The water settles. The stipes sway. A blade drifts past you, detached on its way out of the forest. It is still green, still whole, only separated from the stipe it grew on, and now it moves with the current rather than against it. It will travel. It will carry whatever it carries: chemistry, energy, the slow, patient work of months of photosynthesis, somewhere beyond the edge of the forest, to creatures that have never entered this place, that live in open water or deeper water or on a distant seafloor, and that will receive what this blade offers without knowing where it came from. That is what the forest does, quietly, all the time. It gives outward. The light is changing again. It is lower now, the afternoon becoming something else. The green light is deepening. The shadows between the stipes are longer and darker and softer at the edges. The fish that were in the midwater have moved, some higher, some lower, some into crevices in the holdfast zone that you had not noticed before. The forest is rearranging itself for evening, and the rearrangement is not dramatic. It is gradual. It is the way all large things change, so slowly that no single moment is the moment it happened. You drift lower. The rock is close now. You can see the detail of it, the texture, the encrusting life, the small snails moving in their slow arcs. A sea star is motionless against the stone, its arms extended, its color deep in the dimming light. It has been there for a long time. It will be there for a long time more. The surge is gentler now. Evening quiets the water near the surface, and the quieting travels down. And down here the movement is very slight. The stipes sway less. The particles drift more slowly. The columns of light have narrowed and grown amber at the edges, and they are not really columns anymore, just a general softness above, a pale green ceiling far away. The urchin on the rock below has stopped moving. The fish have mostly gone to where fish go when the light fades, into the fronds, into the holdfasts, into the layered shelter of a forest that was built for exactly this. For holding things, for keeping things safe in the dark. The structure of the place does not change when the light leaves. The stipes are still there. The holdfasts still grip. The gas bladders still float, pressing gently against the surface from below, keeping everything lifted. The forest does not sleep, but it grows quieter. The pace of things slows. The water moves, but less urgently. The particles drift, but more gently. The stipers sway, but only barely. Barely. The whole forest settling into a long, slow breath that it will hold through the night. You are very still. You are not a body. You are not a fish or an otter or a drifting blade. You are only presence. And the presence is very quiet now, and the forest is very quiet around it. And the dark is coming in from the edges of the water and filling the spaces between the fronds with something soft and absolute. The holdfast grips the rock. The stipe rises from the holdfast, patient and long. The blade at the top of the stipe presses against the dark surface of the water. The forest is here. It has always been here, or something like it, in cold water along rocky coasts, reaching toward whatever light the season offers, bending in every surge, returning after every storm. It does not hold its shape through rigidity. It holds its shape through relationship, between steeper and water, between blade and light, between the forest and the cold current that built it and continues to build it, day after day, without ever being seen from shore. You are inside that relationship now. You are inside the dark and the cold and the slow sway of things that survive by yielding. The water is still. The forest continues. You rest. By now, the forest is no longer something to study. It is simply a place to rest beside. It is still there. That is the quiet truth at the end of all of this. Right now, somewhere along a cold and rocky coastline, the kelp forest is moving in the dark. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would draw attention. The fronds are lifting and settling in the slow rhythm of water that has been moving this way for a very long time. The holdfasts hold. The gas bladders keep their patient upward pull. The forest continues, as it has through every hour of this night, asking nothing and receiving everything it needs from the current passing through it. There is something settling in that image. A world that does not require stillness to rest. The fish are tucked into their chosen places among the blades. The urchins are slow on the rock below. An otter, perhaps, floats at the surface with its paws folded against its chest, rising and falling with the swell. Each of them is doing the same thing you are doing now, letting the night be what it is, letting the body become heavy and the mind become soft, and the hours pass without any effort at all. The kelp forest survives by yielding. That was the thing, the central thing, woven through all of it, not by hardness, not by resistance, by bending far enough that the force of the water passes through rather than breaking what is there. The stipes bow, the blades stream. The whole canopy leans in the surge and then returns, unhurried, to where it was. That is not weakness. It is a different kind of endurance, one that has outlasted things far more rigid than itself. You have moved through that world tonight. You have felt the cool water and the green light and the long vertical reach of something alive that built itself from almost nothing. From a single holdfast gripping stone, from a thread of algae finding the light, from the patient accumulation of growth and relation and the slow cooperation of creatures sharing a layered world. None of it was planned. All of it persists. Let your jaw go soft now, if it is not already. Let your hands open, easy and still. Your body has nothing left to do. The weight of it is complete. The kind of weight that comes only when something has finally released its last small effort and is simply resting in the fact of being held. The forest keeps swaying in the dark. The water keeps moving through it. The lives within it keep their slow and quiet continuity, breathing in their way, resting in their way, held by the same world that holds you now. You are in the dark too, still, unhurried, part of the same long story of living things finding ways to rest when rest is what is needed. Your eyes are heavy. Let them be. The forest is still there. It will still be there. Good night.